coming back to school with me. We could have done it all so easily.
Hi, my name is Craig Thompson Wood. I'm the board game teacher. Thanks for coming to the classroom. Today I'm straying a little bit away from the board games and moving more into the world of role-playing, but still within the world of games, and I want to take you to see Dungeons and Dragons. So Dungeons and Dragons, one of the main reasons I wanted to do this is a game that I had been playing probably longer than any other. Now there have been long breaks in between. I started playing this when it first came out back in the late 70s, and then again many years ago, we played for years, and then we took a long break. It was maybe 10 years ago or so I started again, and it was kind of off and on, and currently I'm involved in a couple of campaigns now as well. So it's been a part of my life for most of my life, and it's one of the games that I attribute a lot of my learning to, and that's what I really felt I wanted to talk about it today, because of how much I felt it has done for me personally in terms of my learning. So first and foremost, most obvious for Dungeons and Dragons and what it's going to do for you is it's going to inspire reading. Because, I mean, I have just 3 books in front of me here today, but there are so many books and modules and articles and things that you will be reading through the course of your play of Dungeons and Dragons that it's just part of the game. You can't get away from that. And so the reading is, you know, if you really want to encourage somebody to read, this is one way I would strongly recommend doing it. And I'd be certainly remiss if I didn't mention one very important aspect of Dungeons and Dragons, which is really important in terms of the learning that occurs, and that's in writing. Now, writing can occur in several different ways throughout the game. For example, if you could be writing stories, be inspired to write stories about what's happening to the characters, or to tell a story of something of the history that's happened in a particular area of the town. So there's some opportunities for narrative writing in there. Particularly if you're the dungeon master, this is going to be something that you're going to be doing, is a lot of this kind of writing. There's also, you know, if you're, you know, maybe there's a letter that the players have found, so you have to learn, you know, formats of letter writing and how a letter would be written. There's research writing that you're doing. There's the note-taking that will happen from the dungeon master's perspective, keeping notes of what's happening so they know from session to session what has occurred. Also on the players' parts to keep notes of what's happening so they also remember. There's also just the writing of the dungeons themselves, the formats of, you know, taking the notes and, you know, organizing things so that way you can, as a dungeon master, lead the players through the experience. So there really are just several forms of writing that can be inspired through Dungeons and Dragons. Some of them are more necessary than others, but certainly I know that myself have done all kinds of different writing just for my sheer love of the game and how it has inspired me to do these things. So it's, again, not doing it because I had to, but because I was really and truly inspired to do it. Another thing that is developed through the game is some basic math skills. You're adding and subtracting mostly, because when you are doing things like if you find treasure, okay, so you find, say, 12 gold pieces, okay, you add those to your current stash that you have, and how much now do you have? Or if you're adding your experience points to see if you go to the next level. And with the experience points too, you might look and say, well, you know, I need 2,500 experience points to get to my next level. I'm currently at this many experience points. How many do I need? Which then you start getting into subtraction. So there's just a lot of this math skills that come into it as well. And I think about all the vocabulary that I learned too. And I'm not just talking about like the medieval stuff, like all the different types of armor and medieval weaponry and the parts of a castle and all those kinds of things that I learned. But I think of words like, you know, dexterity and charisma. Those are words that are, you know, very integral to Dungeons and Dragons, and I learned through playing this. I think of also things like a doppelganger, which is a term I learned because it's a Dungeons and Dragons monster. I learned what that means. A lot of these things come back to my interaction and my experience through this game. I also think of all the research skills that I have developed, and I know other people develop through playing Dungeons and Dragons, particularly when you are the dungeon master and you are preparing the adventures for the other people. You need to do maybe some research into what might be realistic and acceptable within that world. I mean, a good example for research is just in researching some of the characters that I've had and just trying to get some ideas on what might be some things about them. So if they've gone through maybe some personal traumas, what might be some ways that that might manifest themselves. So looking up some psychology articles, or if I'm looking to create a world, like if I'm the dungeon master and I'm creating something, researching some of the environments and things like that, and what might an actual swamp be like, and what might you be expect in that area, just so I can get a sense and make the world more real for the people who participate in it with me. In playing Dungeons and Dragons, there's a lot of problem solving that happens too. Your party of adventurers may encounter a particular trap or a riddle or something they have to solve, or even overcoming a group of monsters or something. How are you going to go about doing that? Are you going to just charge in, or are you going to be a little more clever about it and try something that's going to be hopefully more successful than just a straight charge? So there's a lot of these opportunities, again, for problem solving and figuring things out. In Dungeons and Dragons, you also have opportunities to learn about cartography. Now, cartography is just a fancy word meaning reading and drawing maps. Because, whether it's a map of the world that you're looking at, or a map of a dungeon, whether you are the dungeon master who is controlling everything and drawing the dungeons and planning what you're going to send the adventurers through, or if you're a player and you need to read the maps that you're being given, maybe keep track of your own maps that you are drawing as you go through something, so that you don't know where you've been within the dungeons. And honestly, I've lost track of how many maps I must have drawn through my life, more so when I was younger. But in planning and just creating worlds and things that you have ideas for, and you just want to bring them to life, and you do so through these maps that you make. Sometimes just for fun, and sometimes because you are planning an adventure. Dungeons and Dragons also gives you the opportunity to be artistic. Whether you are, want to draw out your character that you've created so that people can get a sense of what they look like, or sometimes you may want to, get some miniatures that represent your character. And so I have 3 different game systems here. None of them are actually Dungeons and Dragons, but these are 3. They could be used for Dungeons and Dragons. There are 3 different models, 3 different systems that I painted myself. So this is again something you could be doing in developing some artistic talents and ideas and creativity through the play of Dungeons and Dragons. And finally, another one of the big things that you're going to get through Dungeons and Dragons is social. Just the social interactions with other people. Because Dungeons and Dragons is a social activity. You cannot play Dungeons and Dragons alone, at least there's not any way that I know of. Because, at the very least, you need one person who's a dungeon master who is controlling the mission, the monsters, and everything that happens, leading the adventurers through the story, and the other people are the adventurers who are traveling and encountering whatever the dungeon master sets out for them. So, usually Dungeons & Dragons is best played as a group of people. So you have 2 or 3 people as the adventurers, and then you have the one person as the dungeon master leading people through. So learning to get along with these other people, talking things through, just having that social interaction with another human being, to my mind, is just a very important thing that we need to do more of these days. So Dungeons and Dragons requires a time commitment, and that's something that I think is good as well. As you're planning, you're around this, you maybe set up scheduling to do this kind of thing, and if you can encourage your family to play with you, I think this would be an excellent opportunity to have again a family game night. If this is something you think you might enjoy, then maybe Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe there's other systems you might look at as well. All of which, any kind of role-playing system would be one that would be an excellent choice, I think, for a family game night, depending on the age of the people that you're playing with. And I think back to when my brother and I were teenagers, and this is when Dungeons and Dragons was starting to get this bad rap from people, that people were saying that it was satanic and promoting witchcraft, and that it was inspiring students, young kids, to do really terrible things in the name of, because they've been influenced by Satan and whatever. I mean, all because of Dungeons and Dragons. And what utter nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I knew many people who played, and I've never known anybody to have taken it like anywhere near that far. What's more important too is that my mother said how much she loved it, because as teenagers, that is the age when kids can start to get a bit crazy and things like that. But my mom was always happy when we went out, because she knew where we were and what we were doing. We were at some friend's house playing Dungeons and Dragons. She knew we weren't out there doing drugs, getting into trouble, doing all those kinds of things that maybe some other teenagers were doing. She knew we were doing what she felt to be a very positive and productive activity. And I couldn't agree with you more, Mom. And just in closing, I'd like to say too that there's a number of celebrities, a little bit of celebrity endorsement here for Dungeons and Dragons. These celebrities are also big-time Dungeons and Dragons players, some of whom you might not suspect. Such celebrities as Mayim Bialik, Vin Diesel, and Joe Manganiello. All big-time Dungeons and Dragons players, among others that are out there. These are just a few that I came across. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. If you have any questions about Dungeons & Dragons or other role-playing games, if you maybe would like some suggestions of what kind of role-playing game might be good for your family, maybe leave me a message in the comment section below, and I will do my best to make a recommendation and help you out with that. Until next time, I'm Craig Thompson-Wood, the board game teacher, saying thanks for coming to the dungeon.
Are you coming back to school?